Hey everyone, welcome to episode 25 of the Caught by Happy podcast. 25 of these bad boys out in the wild, running free. Kind of seems like a milestone. Is that a milestone? Kind of feels like one. Probably a good time to take a little break, evaluate some stuff, figure out what the heck is going right with this thing, maybe where we can improve, maybe narrow the focus a little bit. Or hey, maybe not. Maybe you like being kind of all over the place with the guests I have on. I've enjoyed getting to know some of these people who do some stuff I'd never in a million years even think about doing. People who have different interests than me, or people who see the world in a completely different way. It's been fun, and I hope I can continue to talk to these awesome people. But I gotta be honest, this social distancing, quarantine, staying home lifestyle has not been a catalyst for creativity on my part. I can't focus on anything because, the kids are here, which is not a bad thing. I'm enjoying this extra time with them when they're not trying to kill each other or me. But then there's also trying to get some work done so I can pay the bills and buy food. And even though the wife's a teacher and is out of school for the rest of the year, she still has to work and contact her students and the parents of the students and then have conference calls and team meetings and all that stuff. So, like all of you with young kids and two working parents, we've kind of had to figure out how to work in shifts while keeping our kids alive. One of them is a 2-year-old who, of course, is all up in our business constantly. So, long story short, our kids haven't really learned anything during this. Maybe yours haven't either. If not, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We're doing the best we can. And if we all get out of this thing alive, then that's all that matters. Sorry we never got to calculus, but I made you a peanut butter and banana sandwich using the bread I decided was worth the risk to go to the store to buy. You got a homemade lunch today, and then you rode your bike to the stop sign and back 4,000 times, and that's probably more important than anything I can teach you. But what about you? How are you doing? Let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook, or email caughtbyhappy@gmail.com. Tell me the story of what's going on in your life right now, how your world has changed. Is there anything you kind of like about it? Or what do you hate about it? What have you discovered about yourself, or whether you're able to get focused creative time with a hobby or a passion of yours? I'd love to read your notes on the podcast one day, or you could come on and just be a guest. Let me check the calendar. Yep, it's wide open. One other thing I want to do real quick is just send a shout out to Hurley's Tavern in Glen Allen, Virginia. If you are in the Richmond area in the West End and you're looking for dinner, give Hurley's Tavern a shout. Go to hurleystavern.com. Check out their menu. They've got some great bar food options. You know, when you really want to carb load, they've got these buffalo blue cheese tater tots. And if you special order it with some chicken, I mean, it's delicious. We go there every Sunday during the football season. That's where the Bills backers of Richmond, Virginia hang out. That's our headquarters. That's our meeting place. Mark Hurley, the owner of the place, has been like family to us. He's opened his doors since 2013 every Sunday to the Bills Mafia in Richmond, Virginia. And even though he's a Redskins fan, he's family to us too. So check out Hurley's Tavern, hurleystavern.com. You can order for curbside pickup or Grubhub delivery. Great food, great wings, awesome people. And yeah, you can even get your beer there too. That's hurleystavern.com. So guys, I've been doing a lot of research lately on how to take this podcast and another podcast project I've got in the ideation stage to a more polished professional level. I bought a little camera and I got some lenses for some vlog style stuff. And without getting too nerdy about gear or anything, I'm looking to get some new equipment, maybe run some promotions in the near future. And that's why I sometimes talk about products or services that I recommend in this here introduction. And then I mentioned that the links can be found in my show notes. And if you use those links to shop, I'll earn a small commission. So I just want to say thanks to those of you who have clicked on any of those links, maybe made a purchase. This week, I'm going to put a few links to some of the gear that I would eventually like to buy, or maybe in some cases I have already bought. I'm putting those links in the show notes so you can see exactly what that commission I earn will hopefully be going towards one day. And if you're an equipment geek and think the stuff I'm researching is maybe not the best and you have better recommendations, hey, I'm all ears. Again, you can email me at caughtbyhappy@gmail.com. Today on the show, I am talking to Greg Roedersheimer. Greg and I met a few months back through a mutual friend. Turns out old Greg himself has a little podcast as well. It's called Suburban Folk, and you can find it the same place you found this one, which is pretty much anywhere people find podcasts like Apple, Spotify, Google, Podchaser, wherever. If you're listening to this podcast, I shouldn't have to tell you how to find it. Suburban Folk explores the topics of health, finance, travel, DIY, parenting, pretty much all the topics that an adult human being would have an interest in. So definitely go check that out and leave him a review as well. Anyway, Greg's been following his passions and doing what he loves for a long time. He happens to really like data stuff, analytics, operations, stuff like that, stuff I don't understand, but he seems to really get it and get it to the point where he's actually starting to set the wheels in motion to create his own powerhouse consulting firm that can go into a company or a small business and streamline their processes. He's done a bunch of other things too over the course of the years in order to make money and have a little financial freedom. Obviously, he's a numbers guy, so he's got his own personal finance game right. Again, stuff I don't understand if you want to take a look at my portfolio of debt, but he's done it right, and he's done it all from playing in bands to teaching guitar lessons to even dressing up like Disney characters for kids' birthday parties. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. So I don't even know why I'm telling you. Why don't we just let the man speak for himself, all right? Here's my chat with Greg Roedersheimer. Mr. Gregory.
Matt.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I am excited to be on the show.
Yeah, well, this has kind of been a long time in the making. We've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad we finally had the opportunity to get this thing together.
Yeah, I've been listening to your show for a while, as you know, and I've liked what a lot of your guests have been bringing to the table, but I have this sinking suspicion that they might have it more together than I do. So I wanted to bring my perspective of how I've pursued happiness in the last few years in pursuing many, many different things with maybe some universal themes that I've discovered along the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate that. Everybody is different. Everybody's got a different story to tell. So it doesn't matter what you bring to the table or what somebody else brings to the table. Everybody's story is unique. Everybody's story is different. And as long as you're out there pursuing your dream and pursuing your happiness, that's what we're trying to do here. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, and it's great. And I think it's really, really good for people to hear. So hopefully I can contribute to the stories that you've been able to put across to folks.
Yeah, man, absolutely. But before we get into it, though, why don't you tell me how you're doing right now with all of this?
Day by day, I'm sure that's cliche to say, the more specific changes that we've had in my household. I actually am a remote worker, have been for over a year now.
Mhm.
So that hasn't been much of a change. The daycare situation. So my kids are 3 and 5. Our daycare stayed open, actually is continuing to stay open with some shortened hours.
Oh, wow.
But just family dynamics, talking it over with my wife, obviously, and even other family members, we opted to keep them home starting this month. And my mother-in-law is local, so she has graciously offered to do teaching duties while we are working. My wife's a physician, so she is still working at this point.
Has she had to deal with anybody who's been affected by this?
Not that she's aware of, at least anyway. She's in dermatology, so most of what she gets are your regular 6-month checkups. So it's possible that somebody's had something going on and she's trying to be extra careful with it.
Oh, wow.
But
I wonder, is she limiting appointments now?
they are, to some extent. They're trying to keep it to non-essential. The other thing that they've done is, as quickly as they can, ramp up their telehealth. So if somebody calls and cancels because they understandably don't want to leave their house, if they don't have to, depending on what their visit is, they'll offer that telehealth option, which has been kind of cool to see. You know, there are a lot of different things that different businesses are doing to keep up with what's going on. And that's one that they've been able to ramp up pretty quickly.
Well, you're already a remote worker. So do you think that this is going to change the workforce culture with teleworking and telehealth? I mean, just tele everything now. Like now that we're kind of forced into getting this infrastructure in place, is this going to have a lasting change once this whole coronavirus thing is over?
I'm inclined to say yes. However, I think it's really going to depend on some months after this is all over, and obviously how people that haven't been remote workers have performed. I've been reading that employers are watching the internet usage and other things that their employees that were not remote workers are doing. So I'm sure they'll be looking at that.
Like watching the internet usage on their home computers?
Yeah, well, I mean, if they're doing it on their work laptop, for example, which of course they can do anyway. Right. And it's one of those things where, yeah, company policy for any company you work for is stay off of your personal email, stay off of Facebook, social media. But has everybody at least logged in a few times ever? Certainly. And if we're being more honest with ourselves, more than that. Right. But they don't really penalize anybody because everybody does it. So I think they are starting to ramp that up.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what field you're into. I mean, I've always been in the communications field, and for a big part of my career, social media and being online and talking to people was the job. So, I mean, I guess if you're in, I don't know what kind of you're in what field now?
I'm in healthcare, specifically though data and analytics. So a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that can be done remotely.
Yeah. So you're not spending a lot of your time on Facebook for work.
Right? No, no, not for work purposes.
Right.
Certainly
Right.
not.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh. Not much really to tell as far as the area is concerned, except for lots of snow. I know you're from, Buffalo area, so
Yep.
we have that in common as far as what
Yeah.
the winters and stuff look like.
Did you go to college up there?
I went to a little school in Wheeling, West Virginia. My dad actually went there as well. So the only reason I knew about it is because he was an alumni. I've always been, well, frankly, cheap for no really apparent reason. And the main reason I went there is because that's where I ended up getting the most help to go,
Mhm.
which ended up being a good thing later on as far as career and stuff is concerned, just allowing some flexibility that I didn't come out with a whole lot of student loans. So I wasn't necessarily bound to one job or another, which was nice when I was first coming out. And I was a communications major, so that was kind of difficult to find a position. So maybe I didn't
Uh,
have quite as much
I hear you.
heat put on me coming out of school, because my joke with what I learned in communications is a lot of the jobs a lot of people are interested in, like being a newscaster or
Sure.
audio video with
Yep.
like what we're doing now. And that means there's a lot of competition. And that also means, from the financial standpoint, supply and demand, they can get away with not paying people a lot, has
Right.
been my
I
take.
mean, it is not a glamorous job, and I remember even, back in I was taking a field television production class with a great professor at SUNY Cortland. Doc Hollenbach was his name, and he was straight up with us. And this was the '90s. He was like, "Look, if you think you're going to make money in this field, you are dead wrong. You're not getting into this for the money. You're getting into it because you really enjoy TV production, studio production, that kind of stuff."
Yeah, and I found the exact same thing. As a matter of fact, right when I reluctantly took a job in health insurance, my former professor reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have one unpaid internship as a cameraman for a local Pittsburgh news outlet, and you'd be the only guy that I would offer it to, but hey, it is unpaid. I understand if you have another gig." I did end up going with the corporate job,
Mhm.
uh, and was kind of the sure thing at the time. But that gave me a really small taste of what that competition and how that was going to be,
Yeah.
kind of going straight for those communications jobs.
Yeah, I did kind of the opposite thing. I graduated from college and I applied to TV stations and pretty much any media production company, if it wasn't a TV station, movies, whatever. A lot of stuff in New York City, all up and down the East Coast though. And the only place that called me was a TV station here in Richmond, Virginia that offered me a part-time job. I had already done an internship unpaid while I worked at a restaurant at night, but I got a part-time offer and I packed up my whole entire life and just moved by myself down to Richmond, Virginia for a part-time job, which looking back on it was stupid. But, ended up staying at that station for I think 9 years.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of that leap of faith, and
Yep.
what I'm starting to learn now, separate from kind of the day job and even right out of school, is if it is something that you can stay motivated with, that usually shows in your work ethic
Mhm.
when you're working on something that you believe in and that you want to be doing. Hopefully that will propel you forward into the opportunities, whether it's like you said, sort of in what you've got going on in a day job or whatever you happen to be doing. As we go further, I'll describe my adventures in the gig economy. And I
Mhm.
think that's where I've started to figure out some of my philosophies. Actually, as a matter of fact, maybe even segueing to that, I was only in my first position for a year. It was like a management development program. So I had to go from Pittsburgh to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for about 6 months. Then I went to Salt Lake City for a promotion within the same company. And it was there that I started to dabble in other things that I could take a skill that maybe I've amassed from some other venture in life and make it part of my total income package, we'll call it.
Mhm.
Specifically, the first thing that I did out there was guitar. I played in bands, gosh, since high school into college. I didn't know anybody when I moved out to Salt Lake. So, kind of like what you're mentioning when you moved to Richmond, I just threw out some ads on Craigslist. And that way I could continue to do music in some capacity and, hey, make a little bit of money on the side. And that actually worked out really, really well. I was able to book up Monday, Wednesday, Fridays was my lessons day. And then Tuesday, Thursdays, this was back when gas was $4. So
You were teaching lessons?
correct. Yeah, I was teaching guitar lessons. So I just took everything that I had amassed from playing in bands. And luckily for me, I learned to actually read music. And my teacher, for whatever reason, used like one of the Berklee School of Music books that was a really, really popular one. So it was very easy for me to just take that as the music theory and start to bring in lessons from there. So yeah, that was my first time that I was using my free time and using another skill for something that I'm definitely very passionate about to turn into a side gig.
So you were out in Salt Lake. You didn't know anybody. What year was this?
2006, the very end of 2006.
So you took it upon yourself to just start making some extra bucks by teaching guitar and maybe meeting some people along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I did to save money, this isn't quite a side gig, but it was that summer that gas was $4
Yeah.
a gallon. So I bought a $100 bike from a yard sale. I knew nothing about bikes at the time, so I realized later that it was a girl's bike that was probably like 2 sizes too small for me. But I would use that to bike to and from work on the days that I didn't have guitar lessons to teach because I was just about close enough. So yeah, that's something else that later I sort of amassed some understanding and skills with, I guess, as far as the world of bikes and what I could do with it. And it paid for itself pretty quickly
Yeah.
since I caught it on that one particular year.
Did you get into biking as a result?
Eventually, took quite a while
Yeah.
later to start to do that. I have always been a runner, and actually that really picked up in Salt Lake as well, just because it's such an active town and it's so pretty, of course, with just mountains
Right.
everywhere.
Want to be outside.
Absolutely. So I knew that I sat on my butt quite a bit during the day and didn't want to add eating donuts and everything else to that can happen when you're in an office setting. So I just started running. My dad was always a runner. I've done a couple marathons. With biking was really, I don't know that I would have blown out my knees, but the first marathon I did, I definitely did some damage, put some pounding on my knees.
Did you just not train properly or?
Yeah, that's the main part of it.
Yeah.
And then as I've learned later, some people, just the way your gait is, I think it's your patella tendon, hopefully I'm saying the right one, can kind of get a little bit out of line. So I also started wearing like knee wraps to sort of bring it back on together. And that seemed to really, really help it. So that's one of the reasons I started reading up a little bit more about biking and so on, is just to take it easier on my joints from all the pounding from running while still staying active.
I mean, it sounds like you kept yourself pretty busy in Salt Lake. Did you meet your wife out there?
I did not. The main thing I was doing out there as well to keep myself busy is I went ahead and got my MBA at that time. And I didn't really have any proven theory here, but I thought, hey, why don't I just do this while I don't have a family that I have to worry about after I'm done with work things. So I enrolled in a program. The only requirement was that you were at least a year out of school, and then you could do online. It was one of the few at the time brick and mortar schools that actually had all online classes. They were in Denver, so I had the option to do some on campus if I wanted to make the drive from Salt Lake over there. I didn't end up doing that. But yeah, that was the other thing that took a lot of my spare time is getting my master's. And I figured, going back to the communications piece, might as well go and get my MBA because it seems like I'm going to be in the business side of things for at least the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So you just kind of kicked that communications degree to the curb then.
For temporarily, yes, at least for my day job.
Yeah. What did you do after Salt Lake?
So after Salt Lake, I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I came back. So this was all still with the same company. And I think that's also where I started to figure out a little bit of how I wanted to bring my learned skills together in my day job and in the corporate world. So I was doing primarily operations, but started to dip my toes into some more data, technical reporting, that kind of thing. Was there for 3 years, and the last 18 months is when I met my now wife. The funny story for that is I didn't know anything about what's called match day for med students, but the way that works for people that don't know, when they're finishing up med school, they pick what specialty they are trying to go for. Apparently dermatology is very, very competitive. So she was applying everywhere. I mean, when we were on maybe our second or third date, she was flying to San Diego, Gainesville, Worcester, Massachusetts, all over, right? And I'm thinking, man, we will have only been dating for 6 months by the time she's got to go to whatever place this is for her residency and pick on Gainesville a little bit more. There's not a whole lot of other jobs to be had there for me to take a gamble after dating somebody for 6 months. So depending on where it was, that could have been the deal breaker.
Wow.
So once that match day happened, she said Richmond, and it just so happened that one of my markets was Virginia. And actually one of my strongest business relationships was with a lady in Richmond. So I let her know before I really let anybody else know, like, hey, in the next 12 months or so, I need to basically make my way down here. Oh, and the other thing that actually worked out really well is she was able to do an intern year in Philadelphia, which is only about an hour and a half from Harrisburg. So it also gave us another full year to make sure we were compatible and,
Right.
do all the other dating stuff before making that big move from there. So
Last thing you want is to move all the way to Richmond and then realize, oh crap.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, all right, 18 months. Hopefully we have a pretty good sense of where we're at for dating that long. So we did. And sure enough, that same colleague got me a job here in Richmond with the same company, the same title. And that was actually the only other time, frankly, that communications even sort of came into my day job, because it was with the marketing team, but doing like administration. So whenever they would go out for bids, my team would run all the numbers and get those packages to them to quote new clients.
So throughout this time in Harrisburg and in Salt Lake and now a little bit in here in Richmond, you're doing this data stuff, data research. Is that what you said? Data reporting
And analytics.
and analytics. Is that like your passion? You love this kind of stuff?
I do, from the sense of being able to help the operations people, and bringing together some of my personality pieces. Is I am definitely a people person and look to see what I can do for who my perceived customer is. So I was always operations on the front end, having those frustrations of not having the tech people, not being able to take the KPIs and actually have them mean anything for staff, stuff like that. So I finally started just saying, I'm going to do this myself. And that's where I started to find a bit of a passion in doing the data mining, making my own metrics, making them mean something into reporting, whether that would go up the levels and so on.
That's the toughest part about data is, it takes somebody with your type of brain to pull it all together and analyze it, but it also takes somebody with a communications background, which you also have, to make it meaningful to somebody who doesn't have the data side of the brain. Who can't just who looks at numbers and then just goes foggy. Like that's me. I can't look at numbers. I need to be able to put that into a paragraph or a sentence or a visual aid that kind of helps me see it.
And what I've really learned in getting into that part and being able to do the communication, and where the passion has become more clear, is carving my own path within a company. So for example, a lot of companies, they've got an operations team, they've got these analysts, and then maybe they've got developers, and they'll get into meetings. The operations people can't quite articulate from a technical standpoint what they're looking for. The tech people get the ticket and say, hey, I developed for you the thing you put in this ticket. This is what the words on the page say. And then there is this roadblock a lot of times that they're just not speaking the same language.
Right.
And there hasn't necessarily been, at least in every company I've been in, somebody that is that intermediary to speak the language. And in some cases, I would say even empathize with those operations people that are dealing with those front end clients. And then, like you said, on the back end, relieving them from having to deal with the numbers, deal with the technical part, and playing that role. And the last couple companies that I've been with, I've basically been able to carve out that niche. It wasn't even necessarily what my intended responsibility was supposed to be, but it morphed into that because more and more my bosses and even some of the other departments that I worked with realized how valuable that was, especially again in the health insurance space.
Sure.
The operations people, these are clinical folks. And again, referencing back to my wife, like in any clinical person. They didn't go to medical school or go and become an RN because they wanted to talk computers all day. So it's unreasonable in a lot of cases to really require them to dive deep into that world. And especially when you get into government programs, the stuff we're seeing now, even the snippets, if people are following changes that Medicare is trying to do with handling COVID, for example, that's a lot for anybody to take in, let alone people that's not really what their primary role should be. When they should be clinical, they should be focused on helping patients. So that's what I've found is the way to bring the passions together, being able to help people in this particular sense, so that when their light bulb goes off, that yes, this is the type of reporting that I need so I can track where my people are, or know if we've hit all of our contractual requirements. And then same thing on the back end for the IT people. Yes, you've got these things in the ticket. Oh, you're not constantly having scope creep because you didn't know what you wanted the first time and we can't manage our staff. That's really been the culmination of the different experiences and then bringing them together with what I'm currently doing as part of my day job.
So it sounds like you've had a couple of jobs since you first moved to Richmond, different companies that you've worked with.
Without sort of naming each company, I guess
Yeah.
people could find me on LinkedIn if they're curious. But for the first time, been working for smaller companies, and I've also really enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Like size of company, how does that help you in your professional career? Like, do you find that a smaller company you have a little bit more room to grow and set forth your plan and your process?
I think so. You wear multiple hats. The cliche of the best part is the worst part, right? That multiple hats can be very daunting if you're taking on something that you never really had to and
Yeah.
maybe is outside of your job description. But the best part is if you know what you're good at and you know the value that you're bringing for a particular area, like what I'm describing for being that intermediary, then you have that ability to communicate that out to other departments, your own management structure, and act on it, I think, a little bit easier than a really big company that has a harder time carving out anything other than what's in that big org structure
Mhm.
that you have going on.
I'm wondering if you have had any thoughts of starting your own like consulting firm or a firm that would go into other companies and show them how to do it.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the things that is on the table. I actually have been able to do that in a few small scale instances.
Like saying that's not going to get you fired from your current job, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's been that's been the very methodical approach that I've had to have. So it's been with some financial firms.
Mhm.
So that way I'm not playing in that same space. But that is exactly the idea that I have right now. So what I did for them was very same thing. It was a couple of KPI dashboards. Actually, one was even for just a CPA who was looking to make sure that their books were straight, which
Mhm.
is a natural first step from, I think, when people think insurance, the very next place they're going to go is finance. So that one's a pretty easy one to do. And I'm starting to put my feelers out there. For example, construction's one that I kind of have in my mind.
Oh, really?
Well, we had a big project done at my house last year, and some of the scheduling things, communication from one contractor to another seemed all really convoluted and really manual. So I finally asked the owner of the decking company that we were using, like, what do you guys use as far as your scheduling and
He's like,
assigning your
phone.
workers?
I
Yeah.
call I call somebody and see if they can come out.
Yeah, rather than like some kind of, even in an Excel form or
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that would be something that would be nice. So yeah, I started to ask him those questions and he said, oh, you'd be surprised. Yeah, that he actually had hired somebody just to do like some Excel forms for
Mhm.
him for invoices that he could use and tracking the status of certain jobs. And then again, assigning so he knew where all of his foremen were and what their jobs were and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, well, what's the best communication route? So I'm currently working on that as a local thing, like through my neighborhood and so on, getting the word out. But yeah, you're exactly right. That is a niche, I think, that can be expanded out as a type of consulting business. And we have had some good feedback with the first couple of projects that I've done. I'm hopeful to be able to do some more of that.
Now, are you doing like software development too?
Not me personally.
But you have somebody that can help you out
I
there.
do, I do, and that's the other thing that Well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to forget the name of your guest. Her story was a lot around the couple folks that she went into business
Yeah.
with.
Ruth at Cream Studio. Yeah.
Yes, and it rang very true with me as well. Of a big part of even the passion is who you're working with, as far as what makes you motivated and
Yeah.
want to get up and start working in the
It
morning.
makes all the
Because
difference. It really does.
yeah, I mean they'll hold you accountable. It makes you want to do better work because you know they're going to be putting quality work out there, and you want to do the same. It's like having a workout buddy, right? Like
Sure.
it's easier to let yourself down and not go to the gym than it is to let that person down by
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
the gym. And it's that same give and take. So as I have made contacts and just like anybody, found people in some of the companies I've been with, people that are really good and really stand out. Basically, I've got me as kind of the front end, and again, the interpreter, another guy that can make anything look beautiful in design and his charts and how he puts it together from an analytics standpoint. And then another guy that can do a lot of heavy lifting with data. So I guess for anybody that's really interested in what I mean development wise, like I'm not talking about a computer program or something like that. Like development for me means somebody that's like a warehouse administrator, that can set up SQL or other types of coding things like that, and then can do data mining and bring it all in, housing it like, or SFTP, stuff like that to bring the files in. So that is what I consider the heavy lift of technical for the analytics world.
So what do you think? When do you think this is going to turn the corner to, I don't know if this is your goal, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when do you think you're going to quit your day job and focus 100% on this?
TBD. Yeah. I don't really have.
Is that a goal?
I think ultimately it is. Actually, even going back to what I mentioned coming out of college, dumb luck really was able to come out with very little loans, and I've always been a natural saver. So the good thing there is I definitely have a timeline as far as being, relatively speaking, financially independent enough that
God, you and I are just
whether it's
like worlds apart, man. We are so different people.
so that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, is having that as close to checked off as I possibly can,
Yeah.
then figuring out, if it will be that version to be the next thing that I try to tackle or not.
Yeah.
There's something else that is important to me to acknowledge as well, is flexibility. And I think for anybody that knows starting a business, you don't have a whole lot of flexibility because you need to be there for any potential client or client that you have almost all the time. So that's actually the other thing that I'm being very cautious but methodical about, is with the kids, and especially the age that they are now prior to getting into elementary school. Don't want to get to the point to bite off more than I can chew. So maybe the best I could say for timeline right now is 2 to 3 steady clients would be the first goal, and then figure out what the revenue looks like from there and what other potential business there could be, also while being mindful of just my time. And then a timeline could develop at that point.
Well, you mentioned before the guitar lessons and being in bands. I'm kind of interested in some of your other side hobbies. Are you still playing music?
I have not really been playing music since the kids came. That was kind of the death nail of that one.
Really?
The other reason I did guitar lessons as opposed to doing straight bands. Well, actually, let me back up. When I was in Harrisburg, again, I knew a couple people there from when I first came out of college, but similar to Salt Lake City, didn't have a real big social network. So I did join a band, and we made a bit of a go of it. I mean, we played in New York and Baltimore and I think Philadelphia a couple times.
Oh,
And
yeah? What kind of music were you playing?
we were playing alternative grunge. We opened for Seven Mary 3, if you remember.
Did you really?
Yeah. So
Wow.
I had no idea they were still around. But
I'm not going to do
that
my
was-
impression, but I can do it.
Yeah.
I can do an impression.
You knew you knew they were, so that's a start.
Yeah.
I was able to keep that going through then. But then when we moved to Richmond, I started to audition for a couple bands, but again, it wasn't that long after that kids came into the picture, and I wasn't able to do much as far as playing music. Actually, with my podcast, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, I luckily had pretty much all the equipment that I needed to get started because I did buy a decent amount of recording equipment. That was actually my next plan for a side gig, was to start recording bands. One of those like, hey, if I didn't have time to rehearse and do it all myself, well, hey, that would be a cool thing
Yeah.
to start bringing in other people and doing that.
When you were in bands, were you in on that like whole process of the recording aspect of it, and kind of got nerdy with the gear and the equipment and how to record?
Yes, and for the same reason that I got into reporting, and this is where I guess you can start to see my personality coming out. So very much in the same way that I was an operations guy and got frustrated because I didn't have a resource or didn't like the outputs that I got from certain analysts or reports, it was the same thing with recording. We did the first few recordings way back in high school. It was the one kid that's dad bought him all this equipment, but he had no idea how to use it, and he didn't even really play music.
Yeah.
So
We all know that guy.
yeah, and I mean, to where if I wanted to do another take of something, he'd sort of look at me like I was crazy, like he didn't have time for it. Yeah, that started some of that frustration. And then we paid for some recordings in college and similar. We got what we paid for. We went with the cheapest option that we could get. So after a few instances like that, I started to do some of my own research and, okay, what's the proper way to try to record drums? And, how many guitar tracks should you have? What's the best way to make the vocals not sound so dry, and mask if you're not singing on key and stuff like that. So yeah, and then of course the more I learned, the more affordable equipment started to get too. So that all sort of came together, that I was at least able to do my own recordings and save some more money and be able to do more like projects, as opposed to way back the old way where it's like you better be able to play your songs first take, don't record more than like 4 of them because it's going to cost you crazy amounts of money. But yeah, kind of self-taught that way.
So you're thinking, your kids come along, you think, I'm not going to play music anymore, but at least I've got some recording chops behind me and I'm going to help people record.
That is one of the thoughts that I had. The other side gigs that started to emerge, and back to that mindset of what skills do I have, and frankly, how can I monetize them? When I moved to Richmond, the housing market still was not good. I was going to take a loss on my house if I sold it at that time, which I was not willing to do. So I became an involuntary landlord, which of course, I think we've all heard those stories from the last downturn.
I almost did that. We seriously discussed it, but we ended up not doing it because my wife was much smarter than me and told me we're not doing that.
Well, my one piece of advice for people is I would have done it all myself if I lived in the same town. But of course, I just moved to Richmond. Richmond's about 3.5 hours from Harrisburg. And the problem with the companies that will rent it out for you and then do all the maintenance and so on is it's like an inverse incentive. Meaning when they first took over, for example, my house, they come back with all these things that need to be fixed and repaired. But oh, by the way, they'll repair them for like a 10% upcharge of whatever the maintenance guy is doing and so on. So it's like they're incentivized to find things for your house that comes out of your payment, which is not a great place to be. And it also doesn't really give you a whole lot of trust in what's going on after the fact and so on. So I actually got rid of them after the first year, was able to keep the tenant that they'd found for me, and relied very heavily on some friends to check in on the tenant and do that stuff. So I limped along with it for, I think about 3 years before the market was back to where I was able to go ahead and sell it ultimately. The other side gig part is, again, going back to my cheapness, I just never want to feel like I'm losing money on something, even though I probably was when it first came out. So somebody had mentioned to me refereeing, and I was a soccer player all through high school. Like, okay, maybe this is something I'll look into. So I looked into it. You actually can make like $100 if you do 3 games in a day, which, hey, you're getting a workout. I think of it that way, right? Like I could be paying $100 to go to the gym, or I could go run essentially a couple miles. Yeah, playing soccer or refereeing for soccer. So that was something else that I was able to get into. Of course, it's just a weekend thing, so it doesn't interfere with any of my other job schedules or anything like that. And actually, I did pick up guitar lessons again for a while at the same time to fill up some of my schedule. So sort of had that in my back pocket. My favorite side gig story, though, is I started to really widen what I would do, and just going on like the Craigslist gigs, which, let's be honest, that can be a little bit of a Wild
Oh
West type
gosh,
of
go to
place to be.
the gigs on Craigslist and see what's out there. Phew.
So there was one that said they did kids' birthday parties, like character theme kids' birthday parties.
Uh-oh.
So I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. So we met at like the local Starbucks or something like that, not far from where I worked. And that's what she says is, yep, I book these birthday parties. We'll do Disney characters, we'll do superheroes, whatever it happens to be. And not surprisingly, it's easy to get the girls to do the girl characters, especially for like the Disney stuff. But usually it's my husband that does whatever male characters that she needs. So like, all right, I don't even remember what I got paid, to be honest with you. The funny part is when we leave the Starbucks, she goes, oh, I'm headed this way. Well, she points back to the way of where my office is. Sure enough, her husband is a guy that works at the same company I do.
Oh my
and
God.
and he is the guy that dresses up as like Spider-Man or other stuff for these parties. So I did. I was Prince Eric from The Little Mermaid for one of these parties. It was fun. I mean,
You did it one time?
I did it one time. The only reason I didn't do more is because they actually ended up moving about a month or two later.
Did you have to furnish your own costume, or did she at least provide that for you?
She did. She did. We had a fitting for some of the costumes that she had ready to go to make sure that they were the way they were supposed to be.
Oh
And
my
then,
God.
yep, just showed up. I didn't have to sing. That was not something that I had to do. I just had to watch the Little Mermaid person do her
God.
song, and then
I always wondered how those people ended up doing that job. Like, what did it take for you to throw on that tight Spider-Man costume and
well,
go
hey,
try to juggle in front of kids?
yeah. Well, I put on a Spider-Man outfit. I'm a big Spider-Man fan. I put that on when my son was a year and a half for Halloween, so I'll do it not even needing the money.
Well, you're a marathoner. You've got the body for it. Me, no, I'm not putting that thing on.
So anyway, so that was one of my other side gigs. But actually another one, just I think the thing that is part of my passion is figuring a thing out, seeing what I can do with it as a side gig or just building skills in general. I did a blog for not long, maybe 6 months or so, taught myself how to do WordPress, and same thing, would just kind of scour the internet for people that were looking to set up a new web page and needed something put together, and did that for a little while. And, $100 or so a pop just to get them started and where they need to be. Now that's a bit of a tough gig. I think people that do deal with the general public, when you're a tech person like that, it goes back to what I was describing before. People think they know what they want, but when they can't speak the language, it gets real squishy about what they're saying they want and then what they see on the screen afterwards. So sometimes that $100 doesn't look so good after you're having to go back and forth with what their seemingly changing expectations can be.
Yeah. I think a lot of that, though, comes with the experience, too. Like, if you're going to make that your side gig or your job, then eventually you'll learn how to speak the language of the person who can't speak the language.
Right.
If you know what I mean. And how to accurately cost out your services accordingly.
Well, and I like to think that that's part of the people piece. And again, where the communications comes in handy. There's definitely a stereotype, I think, for technical people not being able to communicate that well, especially when it's just in one-on-one with other people. So I like to think that I was able to manage some of those expectations and keep a situation that could escalate when you're being asked for more than the original job, so described, keeping it at a good professional level so that it didn't, escalate into a bigger headache or anything.
Right. I want to talk about the podcast because you and I met because we both have podcasts and we're both in the same town. So tell me about your podcast.
So I started my podcast at the very end of August last year. It is called Suburban Folk. The way I got to the name, when I first started to get into podcasts, parenting was one of the first things that I was searching for. I don't know why I didn't happen to be able to find any right off the bat. Just, I guess I was doing the wrong searches. And even the ones I found were more geared towards moms. So my first idea was, okay, I'm just going to do mainly dad parenting things. And then frankly, I got a little bit afraid that I would not have enough material after a certain number of episodes to be able to keep going. And then the other is like, well, do I really want to just appeal to male audience? Why would I exclude female? So that's where the folk part came in. I was like, yeah, I don't need to do mom or dad. let's keep it to everyone. And then the suburban part is expanding outside of just parenting. Some of my other interests are personal finance, as you probably could tell with some of my descriptions of the way I consider budgeting and so on, has always been something I've been really interested in. Health, and like you said, I've been a runner and pretty conscientious of staying relatively healthy and eating well, things like that. And travel's another one that has always been interesting to me. And then home improvement to sort of round out the suburban part. So that is how I am trying to couch them, is relatively speaking, with the exception of travel, most of these are things that people in suburbia are having to deal with regardless of what their situation is.
Yep.
So that's how it all kind of comes together.
It's not just suburbia. I mean, it's just like adulthood in general.
It is. It is. Yeah. The other reason I went with Suburban is a band that I played in. This one guy, when he went to New York and then he came back to Pittsburgh, he wrote this song just like slamming suburbia and saying like, the whole cookie cutter. And so in my mind, I'm sort of rebutting this song that we used to play, of saying, you know what? Suburbanites aren't that bad. We're not that boring. Like we do cool stuff. So that's why I'm trying to keep it interesting for the plight of suburbanites.
The plight of suburbanites.
So, and then the other thing is I knew I wanted to do an interview style podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You and I, of course, have talked offline before of the sheer terror of having to just speak to yourself in solo episodes. So I'll do it some, but I didn't want to do that ultimately. Plus, I like hearing what other people have to say. Again, where I think you and I definitely cross over. I love hearing in people's voice. You can hear it when they light up and they're talking about their passion.
For sure. Yes, 100%.
So I definitely wanted to bring in people that were experts in these areas to have that excitement, learn myself, and then offering things that people can learn that are listening to the show. Because I also thought I was only going to do like friends and family. It would just be sort of a rolling, maybe 4 co-hosts that would come through. But pretty quickly, I was able to get a few folks outside of my circle that were really interesting to talk to, definitely experts in their field. And once I started to figure out where to find more of those people, it's become more of that, of a really large net of different folks. And that's been really, really cool, especially when you're talking to like international people that have even a different cultural perspective than what you do. And then, like I mentioned, I had all this recording equipment that I hadn't been using, because when I got it all, and once kids came through and so on, my side gig started to suffer for a little while. So now at least I'm able to use all of that equipment and just use the audio video stuff that I learned all the way back in college.
You're lucky you have all that stuff. I'm like I'm searching online, like, how do I upgrade? What kind of mics do I need? What am I using the right interface? Should I get this thing?
Yeah, that learning curve, I am glad that I have. And it's funny for podcasting how people are coming to it with different perspectives, right? So if you go onto a forum, I'll see those questions about, a question about a mic or a question about other technical things. I'm like, oh, really? That was the easy stuff for me. I'm out there saying like, what's the best way to use Instagram? And like, what are these other social media platforms?
Well, everybody's good at that. There's certain thing, because I see a lot of people talking about the best way to use Instagram, and I see a lot of people talking about the best equipment. It's just a matter of like what you personally are good at. I think if I could say, like, I think you're good at all of it. I think you're doing an amazing job. And one of the things I really admire about your show, not to just, shake each other's hands here, but like one of the things I admire about your show is that you are very focused on finance, parenting, travel. Like, you've got topics, whereas my show is just very kind of like, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? And I think the people like you who have very focused topics are able to bring in a much more focused audience.
And some of that was just my own dialogue in my head. I think people would say like a marketing 101, right? You need to have your niche. I knew I wanted to expand it out enough because I didn't trust myself to go too deep into a niche and have enough content. So as that was all morphing, I have that as my intro, really just to keep reminding myself, like, these are the topics. Somebody needs to be aware of the different things that you're going to go from episode to episode and how they connect together. So I'm trying at least to be very specific that if somebody stumbles on the show, they can figure that out. Again, I know we have talked about before, but another way that brings this all together for the way that I go about all of the ventures that I have is, what can I gain skills wise from the thing that I'm doing? And in this case, the audio editing is something else that you hear a lot of questions about in
Yeah.
the forums and a lot of grumbling about. And I understand why. There are certain episodes or certain audio things that can occur that make a particular episode a lot harder to clean up than others, but I kind of like it. And that
Yeah.
is something else that I'm keeping in mind and seeing where I can go, starting to network with being able to edit other people's shows. So, hey, if you are in it just to record and you want to be able to hand that thing off and get it back as a nice shiny package, great. I would love to talk to you and go through that process and see how we can work together. I actually find that to be very satisfying to get all of that done.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm looking at for the show. I definitely want to put out the best product I can and also speak as well as I can, which of course is a skill in and of itself that
Yep.
you continue to refine all the time. But even the back end, what can I do from the technical piece? And then making fun of myself a little further with the social media. I recognize that comes with it and the brand. And actually, I think last week before was the first time I ever even showed my face on Instagram. I'm sort of getting over, I'm starting to recognize you need to do that.
I was never a guy to do selfies or anything like that. And the last couple of months, I just realized, you know what, I'm going to have to do it. And I'm trying to get comfortable with it. I don't really like it. I don't feel comfortable, but I'm trying to get there.
Yeah, and I think the lesson that I learned, or at least I heard the feedback enough times from people that they would say they like the way that my questioning goes, or just how my logic is
Mm-hmm.
with the guests. So that combined with also reading, hey, people are interested in you. You are the constant of your show.
Yep.
So they're going to want to know more about who you are, what you do. Oh, by the way, yeah, that means quick shot of your face. As a matter of fact, I think the second one that I posted, it wasn't the guest, but it was somebody that helps them with booking, put, oh, nice to see you. So I'm like, okay, more validation that people want to see and get to know the person that they're listening to.
Yeah, my last guest, the person who's going to be on before you, what as we're recording this, I am just finishing up editing her episode. I was saying to her, because she's got a YouTube channel, we both were saying to each other that if the content is good, then the content's good, and it should speak for itself. But at the end of the day, it's your personality that comes through. Do people want to have a beer with you? Do they connect with you? Like, that's what's going to get people to really devour your content and stay with you. And showing your face and doing all of those things and saying all those things that showcase your personality is what's really going to make that connection.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And then the other thing that I had no idea would be the case coming into it is keeping the connections for the people that you've had on your show. I would say certainly one of my best episodes was a person who just put out a book. Actually, I think her book was delayed with everything that's going on because it was supposed to come out at the very end of February. Diagnosed with breast cancer, lost her baby because she was pregnant at the time because of it, just ended her long-term career, ironically, in being a therapist for pediatric cancer patients, and then had to go through all that for herself. Well, we've kept in touch. She actually just sent me a note wanting to know what I did with my marathon and if it got canceled, which of course it did. And we've traded some more notes back and forth. Some of the international folks, one guy's in Copenhagen, and knock on wood, depending on what kind of world we're living in next year, we're actually looking at doing a vacation in that area in Europe next year. So I'm like, hey, maybe we can hook up and have a beer. So that's been the other completely unexpected benefit up to this point, is just connecting with people in this way.
I agree 100%. I've only done a couple of interviews with people that I don't know personally, that I've met through either like a podcasting forum or like, we use the same hosting provider and that kind of stuff. And one of them, her name's Sarah. She did a podcast with me a few weeks back, Facing Fear. She's great. She's so great. She went to this before everything shut down, a podcasting convention that I couldn't go to, and she ended up sending me back a bunch of stuff from this convention, books, handwritten notes, like all this great stuff. Because ultimately, this community and people who appear on your show, like, it's a bond. We're connecting. We're sitting together for an hour and telling stories about our lives. So we're naturally bonded together, and I love it.
Yeah.
I love that part of it. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, it's something we read a lot in the podcasting forums, but more of the irony with what's going on right now is it is a great way to be able to bond while responsibly social distancing. So we already had it set up and ready to go and can continue to be an outlet while maybe other people that haven't experienced it are struggling a bit, I think, with some of that disconnectedness that we're having to face right now.
So what are your plans for the podcast? What do you got going forward? What do you got goals wise for the podcast?
General goals, of course, keep on growing the listenership. I think organically is the way to go. Just asking people how I can help them, I think is really the best way to get out there. And if I see my listenership go up, a little bit month over month, that's great. But since this is also my first podcast, again, learning some of those skills of what can I do with music production. I created my own intro stuff on my own with my keyboard. So, hey, maybe that's a service that I can use. And then like
Absolutely.
I said, yeah, and definitely the editing is the thing that I'm really wanting to push. I've put a couple of notes out to some of the forums to see if I could start to do some editing for people that have a podcast and they just don't want to do that, or if they have clients that are only wanting to do that front end part. That's part one. And then we'll see what happens with Suburban Folk in general. If it picks up steam, then hey, we'll just keep on going and see what goes from there.
Do you have ideas for another type of podcast?
The one that I really thought about doing, which is going to seem completely out of left field. I was a comic book reader growing up and have gotten significantly more back into it in the last few years, especially now that you can get like every comic book ever made, it seems like, online.
Yeah.
I was always a big X-Men fan. I've actually been reading basically every Spider-Man comic since the beginning, like 1963. I'm currently in 1984, I think, at this point, up through there.
Oh my God.
So if I can get up through the 90s for Spider-Man, I think I want to start and do the same thing with X-Men. That was one of my podcast ideas.
That's a great idea. I should not publish this because somebody's going to steal that idea if you don't do it.
Yeah, but do like 10 comic books and then do a synopsis of it, what I liked, what I didn't like. And of course, with everything going on, in particular X-Men, because the big question right now is how are they going to get introduced in the MCU?
You should just read every one from 1964 on and do a podcast after every book, every comic book.
That's kind of the idea. And then the people that would come and listen to it would say, oh, okay, this was the original idea in the comic book. And how did they end up interpreting that into the new movies, or what did they do with the Fox X-Men movies? So,
and the other reason why it would be successful is because you would give your take on it. But all those comic book nerds out there would be like, well, that's not entirely accurate. And they'd get angry. I mean, negative feedback is still feedback, and they're going to listen because I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah, it's something that I would definitely be interested in. I would, again, probably like to have somebody to bounce the ideas off of, just because of everything I said for the solo episode. So if there is anybody that's a super comic book person that hasn't taken the time to read through all those, let me know. And I would be interested in doing it. And I was having the revelation the other day. It's like, kind of like they say the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. Yeah. It's probably the same thing in the podcasting world. Like the opposite of people liking you isn't hating you, it's boredom. It's you being bored or boring.
Exactly.
So if they hate you, they'll still come back and listen just to make fun of you or tell you why you're wrong.
Yes, 100%. The more people hate you, the more people are going to like you. But the worst thing is when people don't care about you.
Exactly.
All right, man. Hey, do you want to talk about anything else before we wrap this thing up?
No, I think that's it. I mean, all the standard, if people are interested in listening to the podcast,
go for it.
It's on all of the podcasting apps. So Apple, Spotify, Google, so on. If you just look up Suburban Folk, it will be the first thing that comes up. You can check out the website, suburbanfolk.com. I've got everything categorized. So if you only like one of the topics that I mentioned, you can get to them all that way. Of course, you can contact me through there. And the email is greg@suburbanfolk.com. And if you do happen to have certain projects that make sense for the analytics that we were talking about, that website is roederconsulting.com, and the group is called Roedy Consulting Group.
Yeah, I'll throw that in the notes. It's Roedy, ROED.
ROEDY.
Okay.
Consulting.
All right, got it. Hey, man, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. And again, I know we've been trying to get this together for a couple of weeks, so I'm glad we finally got to do it. I had to throw my kids in front of a movie in order for me to get some time, but
yeah, right on. Me too. It's the world we're living in.
All right, man. Take care.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Well, there it is. All right, folks. He's a good dude. He's a smart guy. Fellow's got his head on straight and is keeping his eyes on the prize. I really think you should check out his podcast, Suburban Folk, especially if you're into the topics of health and fitness, personal finance, and travel, household DIY projects. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts or at suburbanfolk.com. And also check out his consulting firm if you might be interested in that kind of stuff, roadieconsulting.com. Also, be sure to take a look at Ring Media. If you're a creator, maybe just starting to get your vision out to the world, let Ring Media help you put a little shine on it. We can help with audio or video editing, finding the right music, marketing and promotions, overall strategy. And when this whole thing is over, we're going to have a big old party with all these fantastic digital creators in the Ring Media network. So go to ringmedia.com, that's RRING Media. Take a look at some of the services offered. The Caught by Happy podcast is powered by Ring Media, so join me in the Ring Media network and let's make good stuff together. All right, I got to go make the kids another peanut butter and banana sandwich, and I'm going to put on Frozen 2 for the 27th time. Stay safe out there, everyone. Bye-bye.